Donald Trump has been arraigned in federal court today for his role in the January 6th Capitol riot. Despite his legal woes, though, his support from some Republican lawmakers hasn't wavered.
People can see very clearly that this is politically motivated and that most of this stuff is BS. In our country, you're free to share your thoughts, even though people may not agree with you.
For more on this, Etienne and Maura Gillespie join us now. Ashley, a CBS News contributor and the former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Maura is founder of Blue Stack Strategies and previously served as an advisor to former House Speaker John Boehner and former Congressman Adam Kinzinger. And Maura, I do want to start with you because you were an advisor to a former Congressman Kinzinger, who was one of only two Republicans on the January 6th committee. So much of what we learned from that committee's findings have been kind of the guiding light for this investigation here. So I'm curious about your reaction to this indictment and the idea that most Republicans, at least publicly, are still coming to Trump's defense.
It's unfortunate to see how many Republicans haven't read the indictment or paid attention to the January 6th committee hearings, which is largely reflected in this indictment, because it tells the story of Donald Trump not only just failing to act to stop this insurrection, but actively choosing not to stop the riot and actually encouraging it, obviously, as we've seen. So the response has been frustrating, especially as somebody who witnessed and had conversations with people whose real lives were impacted by the lies that Donald Trump has told. So it's been frustrating as a Republican to see that response.
And Ashley, what's interesting here is that you heard the former president, when he was getting on the plane, say that this is a political prosecution. The White House has not been weighing in publicly for everything to the DOJ. Biden is in Rehoboth this week on vacation, not weighing in. That seems to be a deliberate strategy, right? Not to engage in any of the politics of this, but he could be his rival in 2024.
Absolutely, and I think the White House will continue down that path. But here's the thing: is that they've just launched the Future PAC, Futures Forward, which is their super PAC, and so I anticipate that the super PAC will be doing a lot of this work. But for me, if we just take a step back, I led the communications for the first impeachment in the war room, the first war room, which was the President Trump's first attempt to interfere in the election. And at that time, the closing argument was that if we don't stop Donald Trump, it's only going to get worse. And it did. And what we saw was a multi-state elaborate scheme to cheat the election and overturn the election. And that's what he's been indicted for. And then it got even worse with January 6th, where he told a crowd to go to the Capitol and fight like hell. So the real question now is before the Republican Party. They want us to accept that our eyes and our ears are lying to us. I was just commenting in the green room that, interestingly enough, everything Donald Trump has done is on videotape. He's not denying that he didn't do it. He said all these things. He called Georgia and asked for 11,000 votes. So here's the question. It's before the Republican Party. What are they going to do about it now? 50 years ago, next month, they stepped in and they stopped Nixon. They can do this again here. There's a lot of opportunity that still exists for someone to beat Donald Trump in the primary.
But Maura, it's really interesting when you look at the primary because you have candidates like Asa Hutchinson, Chris Christie, Will Hurd. They are going after Trump. They criticize him at every turn that they can, especially in these indictments. But they're not getting any traction. And so what does it say to you that to kind of compete in this Republican primary, to be critical of Trump during these indictments is not a winning strategy, at least at this point?
There's still a lot of time, and I think that they can make some headway. I would urge, obviously, all the candidates to really look at what's at stake here. And what's at stake is that we can't afford Donald Trump. We can't afford to keep putting his legal fees and losing elections, because he has cost us several elections. And I think that that's something that Republican candidates need to speak out on. I'm glad that Mike Pence is speaking out on this, because obviously his life was most impacted by what happened on January 6th. It could have turned out far worse for him, but I'm glad to see that he is, at least speaking out about whatever he said about crackpot lawyers that are advising the president. I would also encourage Republican voters to look at this, as a Republican myself, looking at this from an American perspective. Someone so desperately wanted to retain the power of the White House, the power of the presidency, that he disregarded the votes of the American people and tried to overturn our rightful election. Every election has issues. We investigate them. But as Attorney General Barr said last night during an interview, nothing was definitively enough to turn over the results of the election. So there wasn't enough evidence to prove that, the election was fraud.
And that good point, too, about the January 6th hearing, most of those testifying were Republicans. Ashley, Maura brings up this point about electability. And a couple of the candidates on the Republican side have tried to make this point that Donald Trump is not electable. But Republican voters at this point don't seem to be buying it. And it's kind of bearing out in polling. I mean, we saw New York Times Siena poll. Again, I know it's early, but showing Trump and Biden neck and neck. How should Democrats take that? That seems like it could be a challenge for them.
No, I think there's a lot of cracks. If you dig deeper, there's a lot of cracks in Donald Trump's armor that suggests that there's a lot of opportunity for someone to win the Republican primary. That same poll that you just referenced, if you dig deeper and look hyper-focus on Republican primary voters, the majority of them, 50%, are persuadable and movable. 24% of that 50% don't want Donald Trump. So there's 50% of the Republican electorate does not want Donald Trump and can be moved. That's an opportunity. Also, former President Trump's fundraising's flat and his legal fees are going up. His polling numbers are not trending up. He's got one more indictment and trials to come. So I think there's a huge opportunity here for a Republican to step in and peel away a lot of these voters. The question is who's got the goods to actually do it?
Do Democrats right now, are they thinking about any of these other candidates, or are you thinking that Donald Trump is going to be the person that Biden has to compete against?
No, I mean, I think Democrats we have our own challenges, and part of that is communicating to the public why Joe Biden should be the president, continue to be the president, in a convincing way that'll move and galvanize the electorate. But here's the key, though, is that the environment is rich for Joe Biden. It really is. I mean, you've got Donald Trump with these indictments coming down. You've got the vice president now that's much more aggressive and that's taking greater risk, that's yielding real returns for the president. You've got these infrastructure bills and projects that are actually going to start to hit the ground, and he's going to be able to trumpet all over the country projects that he's doing. So he's running his own race, and the Democratic Party is going to continue to run its own race, and it has its own challenges. But I think they're going to outsource the attacks on Donald Trump to the PAC and others.
That will be really interesting to watch. Ashley and Maura, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.